From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. One thing that I think I'm really good at is training pesticide applicators, and I crisscross Oregon training applicators in various venues. And last week it took me to Ontario, Oregon, which is right across the border from Boise, Idaho, giving me an opportunity to finally have a face-to-face meeting with Ron Bitner. Now, Ron is the newest board member with Pollinator Partnership, but he has an extensive career in solitary bee management and seed production. As you'll hear in this episode, he's essentially descended from royalty when it comes to solitary bee work. He got his PhD at Utah State University in the 70s. He worked with Bill Stephen here at Oregon State University, some of the real heydays of solitary bee research here at OSU. And recently, he's turned his attention to growing wine grapes. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to pick Ron's brain about how to create pollinator habitat in the really low moisture conditions of Eastern Oregon, but also sort of thinking a little bit more broadly about bee research, its connection to agriculture. He's got some great stories, and I'm sure you can enjoy this episode, which we recorded at 6:30 a.m. in a Holiday Inn Dine and Dash little restaurant cafe thing. Okay, hope you enjoyed the episode. Your vineyard. Let's talk about your vineyard, and then we'll move on to cover crops and how you use them.
So after I left graduate school in 1976, came back to Idaho, where I grew up in the Treasure Valley here, and was looking for property above the Snake River Valley, and I happened to be building it up in the Sunny Slope area. Found this property, and I was building it right next to the first winemaker for San Chappelle. I knew nothing about wine grapes.
Well, that's a little audacious.
Well, but it had the view, because when you're at 2,600 feet in elevation, some of the higher vineyards in the country are along the Snake River here because of the elevation, and because of we can have a winter kill pretty easily around here. A lot of years, or in springtime you can have a heavy frost. So the better vineyards have to be on these hillsides. So I started planting my vineyards in 1981, and my background is as a bee biologist with alkali bees, leafcutter bees, and blue orchard bees. So over the last almost 40 years, it's been bees and wine for me. One of the things early on...
so you're not one of these folks who's like, I'm growing wine and maybe I'll put some bee habitat in. It's like from the very start, It was like, I want a vineyard with bees in it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And... because of the work that I was doing on my master's, the blue orchard bee, I wanted to plant stuff that was seasonal.
Yeah.
Because Osmia lignaria comes out, that into April, first part of May, when the orchards are in bloom. But what I've been looking at and playing with over the years, one of the first things in bloom is canola around here. And I've been planting canola strips that have nematocidal properties, so that my bees can feed on it. And because nematodes are always a problem in vineyards.
So you get the biofumigation effect from the canola.
And I've worked with the University of Idaho, nematologist, over the years. So that was my idea. And so I still do the strips and have early bloom for osmia, and hopefully nematocidal from some of these.
So I've always kind of wondered about that, because lots of growers, and we're working with somebody in cherries this spring who's doing the same thing. So the idea is that you would seed in the spring and get a flush, or you do a fall seeding.
Well, I was doing it in the spring. It's better, I think, to do it in the fall, but we still can get it up in October, November, and have a really hard freeze,
and
so
kills
it. In the spring, it's almost a little too late. This time of the year is when it normally should be did. I'm trying some seed blends this year, and most of my cover cropping is just seeing what will adapt to my environment. I was telling you earlier, after 30 years of trying to get, and I've got some plants I know that'll stay to the next year. But with my background in alfalfa seed, I knew what an important plant it was for farmers, but not realizing it. It just grows wild around here. And I was always taking it out of my vineyard because it was just plants were here and there. And about 5 years ago, I just started letting it go and mowing it back down. It's a 4-acre vineyard that I'm live certified with.
Oh, so just back up one sec. So two things. So with the canola, you let it grow up, and then you let it flower and then till it in. Is that how you? Yeah. Or you just mow it down?
Well, I'm gone to mowing. With the live certification in vineyards, it's more about building up your soils than anything. And because we're part of the old Lake Idaho lake bed here, our soils are so very sandy. There's just no organic matter in it. So I used to disc everything, but then it just turns to powder. Now I just mow everything back down. And there's the work out of Washington State. Some people think the canola is helping with nematicidal control.
Yeah.
A lot of growers use it around here for potatoes. I'm using the same stuff. One year it's or in the spring they've got that up, canola up, and then they just plow it in and come back.
Oh, so they don't even let it. They don't even take the seed crop. They just
no. It's strictly just apparently the highest concentrations of the materials you're looking for before it goes into seed. So they get it up, let it bloom, disc it right back into the soil, and then they come back in and plant potatoes.
All right, but you were telling us that another super plant that you have around your vineyard that you were fighting for years. It reminds me, I had an episode with Dave Catlin, the city manager, who's fighting clover on city grounds, and then sort of wised up as like, maybe we should be planting the clover. You had alfalfa, and just the thing, I have to say, it's my first time in Ontario. I don't know if our listeners quite understand the extent of alfalfa seed production in this valley.
It's down in production. I've been involved in since 1980.
Yeah.
I was actually an extension specialist with the University of Ottawa, and we brought the alfalfa seed program here, the IPM program. But this valley typically has anywhere from 15 to 25,000 acres of alfalfa for seed, winter hardy varieties.
Yeah.
This valley is the #1 producer of alfalfa seed for overwintering varieties of alfalfa. So, yeah, it's always been part of, for 30 years, 35 years for me, is working with alkali bees that are here and the leafcutter bees, which I did my PhD with on, working with the guys at the Logan Bee Lab, the Ned Boharts, Frank Barkers, and those people. Phil Torchill, Oregon State graduate, he was the guy that started building artificial alkali bee beds in California. And Bill Steven there at Oregon State, and Carl Johansson, those guys were my mentors over the years.
Before we got started here, we were just talking about how in the Pacific Northwest there is a tradition of the researchers who work on bees to really work as a team. Washington State, Idaho, and Oregon would often do joint publications on solitary
PMWs, pesticide,
including the pesticide one. The how to prevent bee poisoning from pesticides is a P&W publication of the 3 states.
We had a very strong, the other key to this is we had a strong working group of researchers in the Northwest Alfalfa Seed Coalition, and I was a director there for a while. Spent our time in Washington, D.C. a lot. And there was always a key senator on appropriations, either Idaho, Oregon, or Washington, that we dealt with, and they funded a lot of money to the universities because we went back as farmers instead of just a lobbyist, and we spent years doing that. And again, that money was funneled right back into the university system. The first big grant was for chalkbird disease that went to the Logan Bee Lab.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've always had a really strong group, and I just want to see that happen again with bees, because that was probably the first crop that we all worked on, because each state, Washington, Idaho, Nevada, later Montana, but we all had that acreage of alfalfa seed.
Well, okay, so coming back to it, so I always think that's remarkable, and I always lament that I did not overlap with any of those people before I started here. That Bill Stephen passed away the year before I arrived, which is just tragic. I would have loved to have.
Yeah, I didn't, just...
A Saskatchewan boy. Later. No, he's from Manitoba.
Yeah.
He's from Manitoba.
Yeah.
I was just like another Canadian working at OSU. I was really
My
sad.
mother was Canadian.
Oh, is that right?
So every now and then it slips out, but she came down as...
We eventually migrate.
Well, she was brought down as a 2-year-old into
right.
the States. But she was a Canadian citizen until I was in first grade and she became a U.S. citizen. But I worked with a lot of the guys, Manitoba, with the guys in Winnipeg, those guys in Fisher Brunswick.
Oh, because a lot of the seed grown here would probably go north.
The seed doesn't go north. The bees come this way.
Well, of course they do, yes.
The leafcutter bees, when we started getting chalkbreed diseases.
We had Weldon Hobbs on an episode.
I knew Weldon. Oh, did you? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Weldon.
Well, I know his dad. When the first bees went to Canada. That's how old I am. I'm almost 74, but I worked
Oh, right.
with
He did
Gordon
say that.
dad.
He said they came from Nevada, the first bees that went to Canada.
They went that direction.
Yeah.
And so his dad was Gordon Hobbs. But yeah,
okay.
The Northwest industry around bees, especially the non-apis bees, because honeybees don't work on alfalfa seed in the Northwest. They just take the nectar on their way.
Yeah.
But this little leafcutter bees, a working coalition of people. In 1995, I was invited by CSIRO out of Canberra to come down and work out protocols to bring that bee down there because what they saw was this little bee would pollinate 1,000 pounds of seed in 3 weeks. Because of water conservation, honeybees just 300 pounds in 3 months. And the bee was brought there as a tool to shorten.
Yeah. Oh, because we heard that when we talked to Jim Kane that to use honeybees you have to play with the moisture.
You do. You dry them down, and that's hard on honeybees.
Yeah.
So they don't do well. I did a lot of work in Central Valley, California, on the Boswell Ranch, bringing leafcutter bees there. So I've had this great life of working with bees.
Okay, but we were come all the way around to it. So now you've rediscovered you're now a wine grower, and you a grape grower, and you're fighting this plant that you've spent all your lifetime to cultivate, and then you rediscover it as just a good plant, not just for alfalfa leaf cutting bees, but for other bees.
Right. Yeah. That leaf, and it's one that starts to bloom in mid-June. So I've got my early plants, and I've got a lot of bee-friendly plants there. I've got my Sphaerotia, which brings in a little bee, diadasia. So I've got little bee beds around my vineyards.
Oh, you do?
And,
really?
If you come on Mother's Day, I call it my Mother's Day bee because the glomel starts to bloom around Mother's Day. Within a day or two of that, diadasia will show up.
Really?
And I used to have 20 or 30 little tubes, and now on a good year there'll be 300 or 400 of them flying around my deck. And so I spend half my time, my daughter's selling wine, and I talk about bees to people. But getting back to the plant, this one plant, alfalfa, I was always trying to take it out, remove it. When you're a vineyard grower, it has to look like it does in California. Nothing there. It's all. That was defeating my purpose of cover crop. So I started letting the alfalfa seed just go. And now it's reseeded, and I've got strips of alfalfa throughout my vineyard. And yeah, it looks a little messy, but we come back in, and I've got my workers that just take weed whackers to it and knock it down every 3 weeks. It just keeps on blooming for my bees and filling in. I've got some clovers in there. I've tried a lot of other plants. The biggest problem with cover crops is fighting the weeds that come in the first week.
Well, I guess, and the other nice thing with alfalfa is it has such a deep root. I remember when in southern Alberta, you could be late summer when there's no moisture, everything's brown, and if you see this patch of green, it's an alfalfa plant. Like, it really doesn't need anything to go on.
That's why I was invited to Australia, because the soil is so alkaline down there. They need a deep-rooted plant to draw the salts and the water table up. But they couldn't grow enough alfalfa seed in Australia using just honeybees, and that's why I started going. I went down there from 95 to 2006, writing the protocols for them. Still very expensive. There's a small population there, but that was the whole purpose of that, is to use that bee as a pollinating tool. But going back to alfalfa, queen of the forage crops, it's a great cover crop, and if a grower's out there, it's just wild everywhere because the seed is there. Let it go. Don't try and remove it. Same way where I sit, there's sagebrush all around. I'm taking out the sagebrush. And then David James up in Washington State saying, well, one of the number one crops for attracting beneficial insects sagebrush. So work with what's in your area
Yeah.
for a cover crop, and go out and figure out what insects are on it, what beneficials, alfalfa, and what bees come to it. I've let all of my sunflowers grow wild. My wife doesn't like the fact that it's the best bee plant I've got around me. By fall, it's finally getting bumblebees, and we've got these new little the antidiums that are coming out of nowhere. They've never been there, but I guess they're a pest. But work with what you got first before you tear everything out and put this immaculate cover crop in there.
You go buy your expensive seed mix and then have it fail on you.
Or maybe 2 or 3 plants will come out, but if there's alfalfa there, if you got some sagebrush in your corners in this area, let them go. Work with them. Identify what bugs are there first, and then decide what you're going to plant.
It does remind me, I have an open invitation from one of the managers at Wyman's Blueberries in Maine, and they had the same experience. Steve Javerick was the scientist at Ag Canada who really discovered that the easiest way to create pollinator habitat in those blueberry barrens is just to create an early successional community. And if you did that on the edges of you'd get the fireweed would come up naturally, and it was, any attempt to sort of like plow it down and work up that ground and plant buckwheat was just very expensive, but you could easily just kind of like let the goldenrod and
let it go.
come up.
So when people come and say, that's your cover crop, these weeds, they're not really weeds. It's just what was here.
Well, Ron, I guess we'll have to pick this up at some later point.
Sure.
So Ron and I are in a Holiday Inn coffee shop right now. I'm going off to do pesticide training, and but I really wanted to get it. We have so few episodes east of the Cascade, and I really have been wanting to meet and talk with you for such a long time.
Well, I want you to come over, and I'll show you around where the bee beds used to be. And if you're here on Mother's Day, we'll go visit my little Mother's Day bee, the Diadasia, that hatches then.
It's a deal. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Sure.
Great show.
I'm serious.
Thank you so much for listening. The show is produced by Quinn Sin and Neal, who's a student here at OSU in the New Media Communications program, and the show wouldn't even be possible without the support of the Oregon Legislature, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, and Western SARE. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on the website, which is at pollination.podcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's several ways to connect with me. The first one is you can visit the website and leave an episode-specific comment. You can suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. But you can do the same things on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook by visiting the Oregon Bee Project. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.